Hello everyone, it was a few days ago when I noticed that I've climbed up to 50 subs in this channel. It ain't much, but it's honest work. And for that I must say thanks to some of the people here that still watch my videos. Hopefully there's some impact when I play because of them. I'll make more effort to post consistently as a sign of giving it back. Because as of now I haven't been doing that. And so yeah, let's just jump right ahead into our French defense. So just about a few weeks ago I made a video about a certain French opening in which pawn to h4 here is actually advantages for people who plays against an intermediate player. More on the playlist down in the description below, but essentially it boils down to two things. Most players are still clueless about the line, first of all, and second of all, if they do, it is very difficult to play against white in this position. The name is called Alekhine Chatard variation, and yeah, there are a couple of videos in the description below, so I'm just not going to be repeating the whole line, but essentially, the thing that I want to talk about is second point, where even after black plays a normal pawn to h6 move, which is the best engine move, it is still very difficult to play. The line here that we discussed for the videos previously was bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and after pawn to f4, a6, which is very important to stop knight to b5, and also the bishop to b5. Yeah, white can just continue with knight to f3, developing the pieces. Essentially, the idea will be pushing all the pawns on the king side for white, and black will be doing the same with pushing a pawn on the queen side to attack the white king that eventually will castle on the queen side. In terms of castling, black will leave the king on the center of the board, or he will just castle on the queen side when necessary. The king side castle for black's not so possible because of course the pawn storm is there, very ready to attack the black king, shred the king open if black ever castles on the king side. Not an easy thing for black to do if he plays this position. But let's just continue. After knight to f3, pawn c5 can happen again, pushing every pawn on the queen side, attacking the center of the board, chopping down the center control a little bit, bringing knight to c6 next move. White here can place queen to d2, but after knight to c6, g4, we can see pawn takes, knight takes. This is also engine move. Again, there are many ways to play this. Once again, pawn to b5 is one of them, pawn to b4 is next. Again, just staying true to the position, pushing all the pawns on the queen side to attack white. But again, pawn takes d4 is something that I want to prove here, something that has to be careful of if you're playing black in this position. Of course, if you're playing white, then you have nothing to worry about. You stay chill and relax. I've played through a video to find out why white is probably more favored in this position. But essentially, after knight takes d4, knight to c5, again, engine move, bringing the knight to the center of the board. A potential bringing knight to e4 as well. In this position, we just castle on the queen side. Very normal for white to continue. Again, all pretty standard, pushing all the pawns on the queen side. White can castle on the queen side. Very standard plan for white is to push all the pawns on the king side to shred the black king open. And just castle on the queen side to basically find safety for the white king. Now, black can continue bishop to d7. And after, let's say, bishop to g2, developing a piece, connecting the rook, very standard move, usual move as well. Black has tons of ways to play. One of them is castle on the queen side. One of them, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, maybe bishop to c6 at this moment. It's also a very fine way to play, but it definitely is not pawn to b5. Now we talk about pushing the pawns on the queen side to attack, the white king on the queen side. But in this position, you just can't make it. It's just too slow. And you basically don't combine the plan of bishop to d7 and also pawn to b5. That's just wrong. Because in this position, there's already knight to f5. This is a brilliant move already in the opening. Because again, if you don't take, the queen is attacked here. And let's say if you take, the pawn takes on f5, knight takes d5, attacks the queen. Again, if queen e6, the royal fork with knight to c7. Hopefully everyone sees that. But if not that one, then I suppose queen to d8 still protects the queen, I suppose. But then queen to e3, attacking the knight here on c5. Something has to protect the knight. The knight can move back to several squares like b7 and also e6. But let's just see if it moves back to e6. Then suddenly, pawn takes on f5. That's attacking the knight. The knight then has to move again. I can move to a c7 square, but it's very pathetic. First of all, we can play knight to b6. This attacks the bishop. The bishop can't move because it's pinned down by the rook here on d1. The queen will be lost next turn. But if not that, then the bishop will be lost as well. Still, it's already bad news. Of course, a flashy move will be something like knight to f6 check. This is cool because again, it still provides the same threat. And if black takes with the pawn, then pawn takes on f6 is check. The king has to move to f8. But queen c5 check again. King moves to g8, now the bishop takes on c6. Again, it's the same problem, we get the piece back, but most importantly is that the bishop that is being pinned on d7 here that can't move. Bishop takes on c6, we're not even going to take the queen here on d8. We have a very tactical rook to g1 checkmate threat. Now the bishop to g2 check, king to a7, rook g7, that's checkmate, and so that's no good for black, just to show you. But essentially it's all bad news from here if you move the knight away. Let's say if you move the knight away preemptively to b7, then the same thing kind of occurs, knight to f6 as well, with the same check. In this case we don't have the checkmate, but still bishop takes on c6 is a devastating threat. The bishop is pinned, knight's attack, and yeah, the bishop is going to be lost next turn. So all bad news for black. Obviously we can play knight to b6 as well, that's going to be winning, the same winning line that we saw just now. So all bad news. So yeah, essentially I think that the knight here is just going to be lost. Rook to c8 proved by the engine, but we can play queen takes c5. Taking the knight, getting our pieces back, then we're up a pawn, but also have a monstrous attack on the king side with the pawn here, the knight and the queen in the center of the board. Knight to e7 shown by the engine, but then simply queen to d6. I think this will prove to be a devastating attack. Again, if rook to c6, we can play knight to f6, that's discovered check. Pawn takes to take with the bishop, that's going to be very devastating for black. And so it's all bad news here after knight to f5, a brilliant move, and we have to make sure we play knight to f5 after actually we play bishop to g2. If you play these a bit too early, let's say here, if you play something like knight to f5, then suddenly this will be a blunder, because after the pawn takes on f5, knight takes, this is a counterplay of knight to e4, this is a brilliant move for black. And so we want to avoid that by first playing bishop to g2. Obviously now here black can take on d4, but even after this, we can see that black's bishop is probably very trapped, and you know, this is not going to be of great purpose for the bishop to stay on d7 any further. So yeah, it's still very difficult for this opening to play, if not for the tactic as well. And so I always say you have to be very resourceful in playing this. If you're intermediate players, maybe you want to avoid this kind of line. But feel free to do so and prove me wrong. But essentially what I wanted to say is that you don't combine bishop to d7, pawn to b5 in this position. It's just too slow. Because in this position, there's already knight to f5. And even if not for knight to f5, let's say, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, and rerouting my knight to d4 still proves the bishop to be very useless in this diagonal. As you can see, the bishop has no prospect to go, and if it goes to any of these square on this diagonal, it's just hitting air in essence. So yeah, I don't really think that that this opening is really working for black. Not to mention that white here has some pawns majority going on and to attack the black king. The black king doesn't really have any safe square to go to. You can go to, let's say, the queenside castle, but then everything's too open. We can just, again, shred it open again with our pawns. Yeah, so this is pretty much bad news for black in the technical sense. If you're able to basically squeeze everything out of this opening, you'll be winning comfortably. My recommendation on this position has been to play on the queenside pawn to b5 directly from black, and not play in the center pawn takes d4, knight to c5. You want to keep that flexibility of playing on the center of the board, but also to attack on the queen side, whatever the king is on the queen side, while it's trying to hold everything on the king side. And so yeah, I do think that here in this position, pawn to b5 cuts it for black. And then after that, let's say bishop to e2 or knight to e2. Doesn't really matter, we can play pawn to b4, pawn to f5, again staying true to the position, pawn to c4 next if possible. If again white chooses to change structure, pawn takes on c5, knight takes c5 ain't a bad thing as well, because in the end of the day you get to bring a knight to e4, I don't see why not in this position. But what if black doesn't take the knight anyway? Let's say you move the queen back to d8, back to safety, then I suppose it's not difficult to see knight to d6 check, and after king to f8. This is already very good for us, but the crushing blow here is basically knight takes d5 and queen takes d5, and we're getting through. Attacking the f7, that's threatening mate. Attacking c5, that's getting our knight back. Nothing being done here can stop anything. First of all, bishop to e6, queen takes c5, gets our knight back, and we're just up imperial. If knight to e6, then supposedly pawn to f5 is just pretty good. If the knight moves away, then suddenly queen takes 7 is checkmate. We win the material back anyway. So yeah, that's basically the line that I want to talk about in French defense today. Do check out the playlist if you haven't already. If you've learned anything, please consider pressing like button as well. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.